Scorpio, how many times have you apologized for things you didn't do? How many nights have you spent rehashing every word, every action, every decision, trying to figure out where you went wrong, why you always seem to be the villain? You carry a weight so deep inside your chest that sometimes you can barely breathe, a weight made of guilt, shame, a feeling that there's something fundamentally wrong with you, something that makes people hurt you and then convince you that you deserved it. Something that turns your intensity into a flaw, your depth into a problem, your truth into an exaggeration. But what if I told you that all of this was planted in you, that someone or several people throughout your life deliberately made you believe you were the problem when in fact they were the ones slowly destroying you? That your natural tendency to dive deep, to feel with absolute intensity, to demand truth and authenticity, was used against you as proof that you are too much, too intense, too complicated. Right now, as your hands grip this device, your heart already knows who I'm talking about. That person who always managed to turn the tables, who turned your justified reactions into proof of their emotional instability, who made you feel crazy for questioning obvious lies, who took your capacity to love deeply and twisted it into obsession or control, who used your fierce loyalty as a chain to keep you trapped while treating you as disposable. Scorpio, you weren't the problem. You never were, but you'll find out exactly who was. And when that revelation comes, and it's already coming, you can feel it, it will shatter every false belief they've built about you. It will expose every manipulation, every lie disguised as brutal honesty, every time they made you feel small so they could feel big. The discovery won't come as you imagine. It won't be a dramatic confession or a belated apology. It will come as fragments of truth connecting in your mind, like puzzle pieces that finally form a clear and devastating picture. It will come when you realize that you were always the one trying to fix, resolve, improve, while the other person only destroyed and then blamed you for the wreckage. You, with your Scorpio nature, have a frightening ability to see through people, to detect lies, hidden intentions, social masks. But there's a blind spot that almost every Scorpio has. You believe that if someone consistently hurts you, it must be because you did something to deserve it, because you're difficult to handle, and because your intensity pushes people away, because you're emotionally heavy. This belief was implanted in you by people who benefited from it, because while you were busy blaming yourself, analyzing yourself, trying to fix yourself, they could continue doing exactly what they've always done, using you, draining you, hurting you, without ever having to account for their behavior. The person who was the real problem knew exactly how to keep you trapped in this cycle of self-blame. She studied your weaknesses, your deepest fears, your secret insecurities, and she used each piece of information as a weapon. When you reacted to her cruelties, she pointed to your reaction as proof that you were the unstable one. When you asked for basic reciprocity, she accused you of being too demanding. When you set boundaries, she called you controlling. It was a process of years, perhaps decades, of mental conditioning that made you believe your own nature was the problem. That your need for depth in relationships was suffocating intensity, that your unwavering loyalty was emotional dependence, that your capacity to love with everything you have was unhealthy obsession. Every beautiful quality you possess was renamed, distorted, transformed into pathology. And you, being who you are, internalized all of this. You began to constantly police yourself, to suppress your emotions so as not to be too much, to apologize for feeling deeply, to minimize your own needs because you learned that expressing them made you the villain. You became an expert at making yourself small, at hiding, at punishing yourself for being exactly who you are. For Scorpios born between October 23rd and November 2nd, the person who was the problem was likely someone you loved with a burning intensity. A romantic partner who used their unconditional love as a license to mistreat you. For those born between November 3rd and 12th, it may have been someone in a position of power over you, a parent, a boss, who confused control with care and punishment with discipline. For those born between November 13th and 21st, it may have been a close friend or family member who fed off your transformative energy while accusing you of being dramatic when you asked for reciprocity. But regardless of who it was, the pattern is always the same. They made you believe you were the problem while they were the problem all along. And the reason it works so well is because Scorpios have a natural tendency to look inward first, to question themselves before questioning others, to take responsibility even for things they didn't cause. This is a beautiful quality in many contexts. It demonstrates depth, awareness, and a capacity for growth. But in the hands of manipulators, it becomes a vulnerability that can be exploited endlessly. Because while you're immersed in self-analysis, wondering what you could have done differently, the true cause of the problem is free from any responsibility or consequences. The revelation coming to you will change everything. It will happen when you finally allow the pieces to connect without the interference of the guilt you were taught to carry. When you look at past situations, not through the distorted lens they gave you, but through the cold clarity of naked truth, you'll remember specific moments when you reacted badly, but this time, you'll see what preceded your reaction. You'll recognize the months of subtle provocations, the patterns of repeated disrespect, the 1,000 small cruelties that pushed you to breaking point, and you'll realize that your reaction wasn't disproportionate. It was the natural response of someone being systematically destroyed. You'll revisit conversations where you asked for basic respect, honesty, and consideration, and were called demanding, insecure, paranoid. But now, you'll see those pleas for what they really were. Absolutely reasonable requests that any healthy person would make, and you'll understand that the problem was never that you asked too much. The problem was that you were asking someone who lacked the capacity or interest to give you the basics that every human being deserves. Scorpio, I know these words are touching wounds you didn't even know were still raw, places inside you that have learned to be quiet, to not complain, to accept crumbs and be grateful for them. And perhaps for the first time, someone is telling you that you didn't deserve any of this, that your reactions were valid, that your feelings were justified, that your intensity isn't a flaw but a gift that was cruelly used against you. You've spent so long carrying the weight of guilt that you can't even remember what it's like to breathe without it. But now you're beginning to feel something shift inside you, a sacred anger emerging, a piercing clarity about what really happened. And perhaps for the first time, genuine compassion for yourself, not for the defective version you were taught you were, but for the real person who survived so much and can still love deeply. I need you to do something right now. Leave a comment saying, I was carrying guilt that was never mine to carry. This isn't just a comment, it's an act of liberation. It's you acknowledging that you were manipulated, that you were hurt, that you were made the villain in the story of someone who should have been your ally. And when you write this, you're giving permission to other Scorpios who have been through the same thing to understand that they're not alone, that they weren't the problem, that they too deserve to be free from this prison of false guilt. Discovering who the real problem was will come in layers. First, you'll notice patterns. How certain situations always ended with you apologizing, regardless of who initiated the conflict or caused the pain. How you were always the one who needed to change, grow, improve, while the other person remained exactly the same, doing exactly the same things, but always with a new excuse. Then you'll start to notice how this person treated you differently when you were alone versus when there were others around. How respect and affection magically appeared in front of an audience, but disappeared in private. How they presented you to the world one way, but treated you completely differently when the doors closed. You'll remember times when you tried to talk about things that hurt you, and instead of listening and validation, you were met with aggressive defensiveness. How every difficult conversation you tried to have was turned against you. How you could never express your hurt without being accused of attacking the other person. How your feelings were always treated as inconveniences, as weapons against their well-being, as problems they had to put up with. The person who was the real problem operated at such a sophisticated level of manipulation that you didn't even realize you were being manipulated. They didn't attack you directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they planted doubts. They made you question your own memory of events. They convinced you that you had misinterpreted situations when you knew perfectly well what they meant. When you pointed out contradictions in her behavior, she always had an explanation that seemed reasonable on the surface but made no sense at all. And you, wanting to believe, wanting to give her the benefit of the doubt, accepted these explanations even when your intuition screamed that something was wrong. Scorpio, your intuition has never lied to you. Every time you felt something wasn't right, you were right. Every time your body reacted with anxiety in that person's presence, it was protecting you. Every time you felt that tightness in your chest when they said certain things a certain way, it was your internal warning system working perfectly. But you were taught to distrust your own perception, taught that your instincts were paranoia, and that your ability to detect negative energy was insecurity, that your heightened sensitivity to lies and manipulation was pathological distrust. The person who was the problem convinced you that the very instrument that could protect you from them, your deep perception, was flawed. Full disclosure will come when you finally allow yourself to trust your perception again without filtering everything through the guilt you were taught. When you review past situations with raw honesty, without trying to justify that person's behavior or minimize the impact it had on you, you'll realize it was always you doing the emotional labor, always trying to understand, empathize, give another chance, always growing, changing, adapting, while she remained stagnant, doing the same harmful things over and over again, but always blaming you for the consequences. You'll see clearly how she used your own qualities against you. Your loyalty became a reason you couldn't give up on her, even when she treated you terribly. Your emotional depth became proof that you were unstable. Your ability to love intensely became an excuse for her to do whatever she wanted because she knew you'd always come back. The person who was the problem knew your deepest fears and used them against you. If you feared abandonment, they threatened to leave every time you expressed a need. If you had insecurities about being lovable, they made you feel like they were doing you a huge favor by staying with you. If you had past traumas, they deliberately reactivated them to keep you off balance. And when you reacted to these cruelties, when you finally exploded after months of swallowing disrespect, when you cried because you couldn't take it anymore, when you demanded basic, decent treatment, she pointed to these reactions as proof that you were the problem. See how unstable you are. See how you overreact. See why it's so hard to be with you? No one feels comfortable being emotionally abused and then blamed for reacting to the abuse. Their reactions weren't disproportionate. They were human. They were the natural response of someone being systematically hurt and then blamed for the hurt. Scorpio, the reason it took you so long to see the real problem isn't because you're stupid or blind. It's because you're too loyal, too deeply loving, too deeply believing in people's potential, and because when someone loves you, you reciprocate with a burning intensity, and you want to believe they love you back with the same intensity. But true love doesn't make you question your own sanity. True love doesn't require you to shrink to fit in. True love doesn't use you as an emotional punching bag and then convince you that you threw the punches. True love doesn't turn your most beautiful qualities into flaws that need to be fixed. What you experienced wasn't love, even if that person used that word 1,000 times. It was control disguised as care. It was manipulation wrapped in intimacy. It was abuse painted as an intense relationship. And the final proof of who the problem was is how you feel now. Exhausted, confused, questioning your own worth, carrying a guilt you can't even fully name. Discovering who really caused all this damage will free you in ways you can't even imagine. It will allow you to finally let go of the weight you've been carrying because you'll recognize it was never yours to carry. It will give you permission to feel anger, not the self-destructive anger you've been directing at yourself, but the sacred and righteous anger directed at those who truly deserve it. This anger isn't dangerous, it's healing. It's the Scorpio fire that burns away lies and leaves only the truth. It's the energy that will propel you toward your transformation, because Scorpio always rises from its own ashes, and those ashes are made of everything you believed about yourself that wasn't true. When the full revelation comes, you will understand that every difficult moment you went through, every tear you shed, every sleepless night analyzing what you did wrong, all of this was a result of being in close proximity to someone toxic who was deliberately poisoning you while convincing you that you were the one who was sick. And with this understanding comes a clarity that will redefine not only how you view this specific person or situation, but how you allow yourself to be treated from now on. Because once you see the pattern, once you recognize the tactics, once you understand the manipulation that made you believe you were the problem, you will never let it happen again. Your transformation began the moment you recognized that maybe, just maybe, you weren't the villain you were made to believe. And it will be complete when you finally fully accept that you weren't just not the problem. You were the solution trying to function in an environment designed to make you fail. The person who was the problem will be exposed, not necessarily to the world, but to you. And that's what matters. You'll see with crystal clarity every tactic they used, every lie they told, every way they manipulated you. And this insight will inoculate you against future manipulation, not just from this person, but from anyone who tries the same methods. Scorpio, you are about to be reborn, not as a fixed or improved version of who you were, but as the liberated version, the version that knows its own worth, the version that trusts its own perception, the version that refuses to accept blame for justified reactions to unjustifiable treatments. The version that understands that intensity is not a flaw, depth is not a problem, and demanding basic reciprocity is not being too much. And when you emerge from this process of discovering and accepting truth, you will look back and be grateful, not for the pain you suffered, but for the strength you developed from surviving it. You will recognize that they tried to break you, diminish you, make you believe you were less than you are. And they failed. Because you are still here, still feel deeply, still love intensely, still demand truth and authenticity, but now with wisdom about where to invest these precious qualities. The person who was the problem will eventually do to others what they did to you. Because people like that don't change. They just find new victims. But you're no longer a victim. You're a survivor turned warrior. You're someone who knows the darkness intimately because you were forced to dwell in it, but who chose to bring your own light instead of letting the darkness consume you. Leave your comment. No need to give details. Just acknowledge your truth, that you weren't the problem, that you deserved better, that you're ready to break free from the false narrative they've built about you. Subscribe to the channel because your transformation deserves support at every stage. You'll need constant reminders of the truth, especially when the voice of guilt tries to return. You'll need guidance to rebuild your self-perception on a foundation of truth rather than lies. Turn on notifications to receive content that will empower you in this discovery and help you never again accept being treated as if you were the problem when you were always the solution. The truth is emerging. Revelation is coming. And on the other side, you will finally find yourself free.